Hello and welcome to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Stumbling in Syria. There can be no doubt the Obama administration would very much like to strike Syria and strike it hard. Problem is, few actually buy into the administration's so-called common sense reasoning surrounding Assad's alleged use of chemical weapons. What is the administration's real aim, and has it painted itself into a red-lined corner? To CrossTalk the continuing crisis in Syria, I'm joined by Flynt Leverett in Washington. He is a professor of international affairs at Penn State University and co-author of Going to Tehran, Why the United States Must Come to Terms with the Islamic Republic of Iran. Also in Washington, we have Ivan Eland. He is a senior fellow and director of the Center on Peace and Liberty at the Independent Institute. And in Tel Aviv, we cross to Meir Javedanfar. He is a Middle East expert. All right, gentlemen, CrossTalk rules in effect. It means you can jump in anytime you want, and I very much encourage it. Flynt, if I can go to you first. The Syrians have agreed in some way or another that they would allow international supervision of their chemical weapons. Okay, a form of disarmament. But in fact, isn't it that Mr. Obama himself has been disarmed?
I think so. The administration was clearly, getting desperate that it has already lost almost all international support for its proposed strikes on Syria. I think there was a very real chance that certainly the House was going to vote against the administration, and I think the Senate was getting close enough where it was even thinkable that someone who opposed the resolution could carry out a filibuster. So the congressional option was drying up for Mr. Obama. And now I think Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has very artfully taken advantage of the administration's largely self-generated difficulties, put this diplomatic proposal on the table, playing off of, perhaps an offhand remark by Secretary of State John Kerry, and he's really put the administration in a position where if it doesn't appear to be working with some seriousness with Russia to try and make this proposal work, the administration is really completely checkmated in Syria. As it is, if this diplomatic proposal does get some traction and details are able to be worked out that lets some version of it move forward, I think the critical achievement here from a Russian perspective, from the perspective of many other players, the critical achievement here is you've gotten an administration that was operating more and more outside the bounds of international law. You've actually now potentially got them bound into a legal international framework for dealing with the Syrian conflict, and I think that could have a lot of implications on the ground and diplomatically moving forward.
Meir, in Tel Aviv, I go to you. Let's say there is an agreement. Would that stop Obama, under some circumstances, still to attack Syria? And if that is the case, do you think it's a good idea?
Well, with everything, the devil's in the details, Peter. We need to know what's in the deal in terms of what sort of inspections will Syria be subjected to. How can we be sure that Syria is going to tell the truth? Because before, the Syrian government has lied. Despite being a signatory of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, it was developing a plutonium plant in Al-Kibar, which, according to the Washington Post, was bombed by the Israeli Air Force in 2007. And after that, the Syrians are not cooperating with the IAEA to fully understand what was going on at that plant. And they also have a research reactor near Damascus, and there they found traces of uranium, which was as a result of undeclared
let's stay with the chemical weapons. Let's stay with the chemical weapons here. I mean, is this doable in your opinion?
It is doable as long as there is guarantee that Syria is going to give up all of its weapons of mass destruction. There is stringent inspection by the IAEA, and also if this passes as a resolution in the United Nations as a Chapter 7 type resolution, which means that if Syria doesn't comply, then there could be military consequences. In that case, I would actually say that would be a victory for President Obama and not him being checkmated.
Okay. Ivan, what do you think about this? Because it looks like Obama has painted himself into a corner.
Well, I think he's been proven incompetent in the crisis. I think this Russian proposal really lets him off the hook, because I didn't really think he wanted to do this. He made the same mistake that Kennedy did in the Cuban Missile Crisis and gave a very bellicose speech, and then later on they said, well, these missiles in Cuba are not really alter the strategic landscape, but I have to do something about it, Kennedy said, because I made this bellicose speech. And I think the same thing happened with Obama here. He made this red line speech, and then he had to do something, and then he decided he wanted to let the Congress bail him out one way or the other. And of course, he hoped to get approval of some sort for this, I think, because his presidency, the effectiveness of his presidency is on the line. But then, of course, the vote doesn't look very good, because the congressmen and the senators went home and got an earful from their constituents. Almost this strike on Syria has very low popularity in the United States, and it's very dangerous. And I think Obama knows this. It's very dangerous to start a war when the American people, or in any democracy, doesn't support it, because if you have to do more, and I think in this case we probably would have to do more against Syria than just one set of strikes, then the people are not there for you. And I think he realizes that now. That's been brought home to him. And I think the Russian plan is a good one. And I think everybody ought to step back and take it and be thankful it's been proposed.
Flynt, but it still doesn't stop Obama striking Syria at a future date, okay? Because this is compartmentalized. This is about chemical weapons, okay? 100,000 people have already died, okay? And that's not because of chemical weapons.
I think Ivan is right that Obama is reluctant to do this. He's just put himself in a situation where it's the best of his available options. I think that the devil is going to be in the details, and I expect that as the Security Council takes this up, various other parties take this up, that Mr. Lavrov is going to pay a lot of attention to the details. And I think his goal is going to be to use the negotiation of this agreement basically to get the United States to make as much of a commitment as he can extract, that if this deal is implemented, if Syria really does put its chemical weapons stocks under international supervision, that the United States is not going to strike. And if the United States won't agree to that, then it makes it very clear that the real agenda driving Obama's policy in Syria all along is not really chemical weapons.
Exactly.
It's not even really humanitarian considerations. It's other considerations. And so the administration will either be put in a position where it signs up to that and says basically, okay, if we can address this chemical weapons issue, the United States is not going to be using military force essentially to take sides in the Syrian civil war. And if he doesn't do it, then it's the United States can't take yes for an answer.
Meir, I think it's very interesting is that the United States said that Assad must go not too long ago, and now it may sit down at the table and negotiate this chemical weapons deal. Kind of interesting, isn't it?
I think, it's who you have to deal with. I think, regime change is not an option for anybody in this at this point. I don't think anybody can topple Assad except the Syrian people. But I think what happens here is that we have to ask the question, why did this offer by President Putin, which I think is very smart, came about? It was because America threatened to attack Assad. If it wasn't for the threat to attack Assad, he would not have become willing and volunteered to give up with his weapons of mass destruction. And I think there's another factor here which goes, I think in my opinion, is very important. There was a report recently in a German newspaper that the recent chemical attack was conducted by Syrian forces without Assad's consent. I think the fact that now he's willing to part with it also shows, perhaps not shows, but perhaps gives credibility to the theory that he's not in charge of all of the Syrian regime's chemical weapons, and they're starting to becoming a danger to him because some of his soldiers are using it without his permission, and he wants to be rid of it. So I think for now, it really, if the Russian deal is a good deal, if it allows the international community to know for sure that Assad's not going to have any chemical weapons left within a specified period of time, I think we could have what we don't have very often is that a win-win situation, both for United States
it's very interesting.
Let me go to her allies, and for Russia as well.
Let me go to Ivan here, but Assad doesn't need chemical weapons to win this conflict, because recently it looks like he's been winning the civil war. Now, let me go to Ivan on this, because it's really interesting. He doesn't need chemical weapons.
No, I don't think he does, and I think that's probably one of the reasons that he's willing to get rid of them. They're mainly a defensive battlefield weapon, and I suppose he could use them as a last ditch if he was going down. But he realizes that if the U.S. gets going attacking him, he could considerably degrade his forces, and the United States probably would do that as long as they're going to take the heat for attacking him. They're going to try to degrade his forces as much as they can, because I think they still would like for the rebels to win. I'm not sure why, because I think the rebels are as bad as Assad in many respects, at least portions of the rebels, and I think you're going to have a civil war after Assad goes anyway. So I agree with Flynt. I think the Russians are probably going to try to get as much as they can to let Obama off the hook, and one of those things would be a pledge, maybe even behind the scenes, I don't know, but to not attack Syria at all, or even to not provide much military assistance to him. But we'll have to see how the negotiations work out. But I personally support that, because I don't want the U.S. to be involved in this.
All right, gentlemen, we're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on Syria. Stay with RT. Okay, Flynt, before we went to the break, you wanted to jump in there. I'd like to interject here. I mean, we heard win-win situation here. That's very rare in diplomacy and conflict these days. But is it a win-win for everyone? I'm looking at other players, like at Iran, Saudi Arabia, Israel, Turkey. Win-win for everybody? Go ahead, Flynt.
Not quite. And I think one of the things that's really telling is that since Mr. Lavrov first floated his proposal yesterday, and it began to get more and more traction, at least for the time being, the Syrian opposition has gone ballistic over this. The Syrian opposition thinks this is like the worst possible thing that could happen for them. And I think that they're right to think that, because if this deal that Mr. Lavrov has proposed, if it moves forward, yes, Assad will have to put his chemical weapons under international control, but he doesn't need chemical weapons in order to defeat the opposition on the battlefield. He's been doing very well at that over the last few months. And it basically puts the United States in a position where, even though Obama said more than 2 years ago that Assad must go and that he has no legitimacy, the United States is going to have to deal with him. And I think that Mr. Lavrov and others will use this as a lever to try and get people to the table for a Geneva II conference, but one in which the United States is going to have to drop its very foolish condition that Assad has to go at the beginning of any process. If there's going to be a political process moving forward, it is going to be a political process that engages the Syrian government with Bashar al-Assad as its head. I think this is bad for the opposition. I think it's bad for some of the opposition supporters, like the Saudis. I think this is, very positive for Russia, very positive for China. It's boosting their influence within the Security Council and internationally. I think it's also basically positive for Iran, because Iran, as a result of its own history, is the victim of chemical weapons attack.
Indeed.
Has a lot of sensitivities on this issue, and I think this is positive for Russia, China, and Iran. It's positive for Bashar al-Assad. It's bad for the Syrian opposition, and it's bad for actors like Saudi Arabia that have invested so much in the opposition.
Meir, do you think they're going to give up? They're going to listen to Obama, or go parting of ways? Because the Saudis don't give up easily. Go ahead.
You see, Flynt, the desire for Assad to go is not just the President Obama desire. It's the desire of a significant portion of the Syrian people also. And this is not something that President Obama invented. And of course, it's not up to one. But the fact that it comes from, the fact that he's saying it is because there are people who are Syrian and they live in Syria, want him to go. There are, of course, those who want him to stay. You can't deny that. But there are people within Syria who want Assad to go. And they have every right to demand that after what he's done. Perhaps you would have wanted him to go if he had done to your family what Assad has done to hundreds of thousands of innocent civilian people. The way forward here is that there has to be a solution found where the massacre has to stop. Whatever we like it, this is a geopolitical struggle in this region. There's, of course, Assad and other sides. There's this genuine Syrian opposition. There's Al-Qaeda. There are, of course, outside players, which we all know who they are. And we have to find a way as soon as possible to stop this massacre. Now, Assad winning recently, yes, he has made a number of recent tactical victories he's had on the battlefield. But I don't see Bashar al-Assad winning. Look at him look at where he's been in the last 2 years. He's basically now known in the region as one of the biggest one of the biggest criminals in this region in terms of killing Muslim people and killing Sunnis.
Well,
look at where Hezbollah
there's
is
no
today.
There's no shortage of criminals in the region there.
Lebanon today.
Okay,
I wouldn't call that victory. No,
well, it's
Peter,
turning into
it's
turning into a victory.
Let me go to who has killed 100,000
Ivan, let me
people.
go to you because
please name one Arab leader who has killed 100,000 people, Peter. Please name.
Do you need? Why is a number so important to you? Okay, as Flynt pointed out, there is legitimacy for Assad in Syria, and why is it outside powers have to decide who is the ruler of Syria? Why do outside powers have to determine that? It shouldn't be outside powers. No power should do that. Okay, you don't. Okay, you've mentioned that. You don't have to talk over me the entire time. This is supposed to be a debate. Ivan,
no, but
Ivan, go ahead, jump in. I mean, this is the thing, okay? Assad is winning. And this is why I keep asking the question, because if we take care of the chemical weapons deal, then he's going to stay. And they're going to have to eat their words. And they're still going to want to go after him.
I just think that probably what's going to happen is that this civil war is going to last a while, and it's good that the outside powers, Russia and the U.S. are now negotiating. I think this may lead to further negotiations, but ultimately I think the Syrians have to decide this, and the outside powers can mediate them doing this. But you might have a long-term solution. I don't think Assad, no matter how many tactical victories it gets, his military isn't strong enough to retake the entire country. So I think you're going to have like a patchwork of, you're going to have the Kurds in the extreme northeast, you're going to have the rebels in the north and east, and then you're going to have Assad controlling the corridor from Damascus on up to the coast. And so you might have to have some sort of a decentralized or a partition or something like that. That may have been the solution that should have been implemented in Iraq, but it wasn't. And I think, the problem that you have with these multi-ethno-sectarian societies is that one group tries to take over the government and use it to oppress the other groups. And so I don't see any difference from Assad, whether it's Assad doing that or it's an Al-Qaeda linked opposition if they take power. So I think, you may have to have, we may eventually have to see Syria carved up because it's just such a mess.
Flynt, what do you think about that? Because that's really the next step. If we can get through the next step, what happens after that? It's very interesting what we just heard.
Yeah, I've been saying for more than 2 years, virtually since this conflict started, that in the end, the only way out of this is a negotiated political settlement facilitated by various outside parties that have influence on protagonists inside Syria. But the goal is a negotiated political settlement which would involve some kind of power-sharing arrangement between the Assad government and elements of the opposition, roughly along the lines of what happened in Lebanon. You could even say in some ways roughly along the lines of what happened in Iraq eventually. And this has got to be the goal. One of the major barriers to getting there so far has been this utterly foolish statement that Obama made in August 2011 that Assad has to go. And, that is carried over into all of the discussions about a Geneva conference where Russia, China, others say, look, if in the course of a Syrian political process, Syrians decide that Assad should go, that's fine, but you can't stipulate that at the beginning. And the United States has been really quite obstinate about that. I think that one of the real potential benefits of what Mr. Lavrov has done, we'll have to see how it plays out, but one potential benefit is that I think it could increase the chances that you get into a Geneva process aimed at this kind of new political arrangement in Syria. But with the United States is basically going to have to drop this foolish precondition that Assad's departure has to be stipulated at the get-go, and the opposition is going to have to sit at the table and actually negotiate.
In Tel Aviv, do you think
Can I just add one thing to that?
Go ahead, jump in first. Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I second that up to a point. I think that this statement that Assad has to go was a very bad one. I agree with that, and I think that the Syrians are going to have to reach some agreement on what they're doing. But and if we take what happened after World War I, when the United States Woodrow Wilson insisted that the Kaiser be deposed. Look what took its place, Hitler. I think we have to be careful about what we ask for. And I'm not so, although for the long-term solution, I'm not so enamored with the power sharing, because I think that still creates a lot of tension, and the groups still vie for power for that central government, and there's still that incentive to grab the central government's apparatus and use it to oppress the others. And I think that's happened in Iraq, and I also think it didn't work in Zimbabwe when they had a power sharing agreement. I almost think decentralization is the only way to go.
In Tel Aviv, a weak Syria in the future, is that good for the region? Is that good for the neighborhood?
To be honest with you, it really depends. I mean, at the end of the day, it's something for the Syrian people to decide. If at the end of the day they decide to have to carve up their country, that's up to them. But I think we are unfortunately a long way away even from a solution like that, because the Syrian opposition, even they can't get their act together. We see when there are negotiations, they keep fighting with each other. There's a lot of infighting between them. But at the end of the day, if that's what they want, I think yes, that could be a solution if that's something that's going to stop all this killing. But it really depends who's going to rule them. I think in the Sunni, if there's going to be, for example, a Sunni state, who is going to rule that part of Syria? The Kurds, if they're going to have their own state, which I hope they will, how is Turkey going to react to that? And of course, when the Alawites have their own state, what kind of a relationship is that going to have with Lebanon, who's next door neighbor? We're looking at a Rubik's Cube here that has to, all the sides have to match. And unfortunately, we are even far away from a solution such as that one, which could bring some kind of a stability to this region.
Syria is synonymous with unintended consequences. Many thanks to my guests today in Washington and in Tel Aviv. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. And remember, CrossTalk rules.
I love you.